Okay, so now in order to keep the glazing brush from lagging, I restarted Photoshop. And I'm not going to have other things open anymore. I don't even need my reference anymore after I finish with this glazing. And I can even look at it from a distance and turn my opacity down to lower, maybe even 40%. And I'm just going to subtly hit these areas. And my option will not change the overall tone, but it will change that top color that gets hit in my glaze. So that's why I use those color dynamics. So I'm basically adding all the softness I want. Like I said, it's easy to soften hard edges. It's hard to bring hard edges back. So to me, this is the preferred way to work. And by keeping it all on a separate layer, you can really see the difference it makes. And you can also play with its opacity and dial it back. So this is my third painting layer. So let's look at them. The bottom one is flat, 100% opaque, standard brush. On top of that is a custom brush, lots of little marks, about 70% opacity, and the brush is open at the edges so that it kind of overlaps with each other, not just in straight lines. And I did that by using a textured brush, and I actually created my own, but there are several that are built into Photoshop as well. Yeah, you can use a fan brush for it. And then my third layer is using color dynamics on top at a lower opacity, even 40%. And these are my highlights, but this is kind of soft edge glazing where my brush is always going to be the same size, but the harder I press, the more opaque it is. So it's perfect for softening. Exactly, yeah. Well, it depends. When I paint people, sometimes I like to do it like this. But yeah, you decide on how you want to approach your painting technique. But if I look at each layer individually, right, this is what my glazing layer looks like. I've been doing a lot of work, but it doesn't look like much because it's very soft edged. Yes. So on white it looks like that. But when you put that with the refined paint underneath, then you'll get all those subtleties that without the glazing, it's just it's like a little too hatchety. Well, I've just done highlights so far. Now I can glaze with shadows. And the way you glaze with shadows, it still helps to have the gray behind. The way you glaze with shadows is you simply change the background color to a preferred shadow. And I might even go kind of greenish. There we go. And then your top color, you can go for more of a middle tone. And then I'll keep playing with the what am I trying to say? I'll keep playing with the foreground color, but this is how it would look off to the side. You see how it's warm, but then as I push harder, it gets to the blues pretty quickly. But this is what I'm going to glaze my shadows with. So I might change that top color to something a little bit cooler. Maybe like that. Yeah, that'll be nice. And this will glaze my shadows. And for that, I might need my reference just to see where the shadows are, but I might not like the lighting on that so much. So I can, yeah, just like when you make paintings of anything, you know, the advantage of it not being a photograph is that you can change it in the ways you want. You can augment the lighting. So that green's a little strong. Let's warm it up a little. And this glazing is just like when you glaze with oil paint. It kind of takes out the rough edges and puts a certain color temperature over everything. And I'll modify that as I go. I'm trying not to waste too much effort. Now I'm not glazing much at the hooves and at the eyes and at the nose because those sharp edges need to stay sharp edges. Now another way to use your glazing layer is to smudge. But the way I would do that is that I would actually duplicate my refined paint layer, Command J, and then use the Smudge Tool, which you'll remember from our cloud project. And I use it at about a strength of 50. And you can set the brush dynamics for your Smudge Tool just like you do for any brush. So I'm going to set the shape dynamics to be pin pressure sensitive. Right? And where I know I want things to smudge together, I can use the Smudge Tool and kind of push things around. And it will soften as it goes. It's like smudging with your finger if these were all pastels. Right. But I prefer the glazing method, but I can use both at once. Since I made a duplicate, I can smudge underneath my glazing. So there's just so much you can do, so much. My only problem with the Smudge Tool is that I don't get to actually paint color. And I'm so used to just being able to paint. But it can help me kind of reshape the mouth a little bit there, kind of push things in the right locations. And that can be nice. It can help me model this nose a little bit, as long as I have the colors I want already there. And it can probably do wonders at the tips of these ears, where I still have underpainting coming through. I'm using the Smudge Tool now on a copy of the refined paint layer underneath, just to show you a different way you can soften. And then another tool is the Blur tool, some of you have been using. And that you can just, it's like Gaussian blur, but in a selected area. So if I feel like these marks are too strong, I can just hit it with the Blur tool. It takes a long time to build up, so I'll do this at a strength usually higher than 50. And then you really to see the difference, look at all that. You have to go back to before you did it, and you'll see a slight difference. So the Blur tool is definitely not as fast as some other tools, but it's a way to control. The smudge, to me, you don't get to choose your colors. You can only use what's there. And it's hard to control, and it lags a lot. So my preferred way is to do a glazing layer on top. But there's lots of ways you can approach these same things. All right, now the other reason I like the glazing layer, I have all these soft edges, but in some ways they're too soft in some places, especially because I have this texture. So I can always erase from it as well. But that would require moving away from my brush, right? Which I don't love to do. So as I build up these glazes, It's basically like I pushed all the colors to really strong extremes, and now I'm merging them all together a little bit. In painting, we call this push and pull. Kind of pushing towards one extreme and then pulling it back. And it's building up texture, which at screen resolution doesn't make a whole lot of difference, but at print resolution certainly does. Okay, so now I've done the glazing. Ultimately, what is digital painting? It's just controlling all the pixels. So I'm going to save it there. Waiting for it to save. And then I'm going to play with my glazing layer just like I played with my refined paint layer. Because especially if it just feels soft, because it kind of feels like just a texture overlay, like a cloud that my deer is stuck in. So what I can do is I can say, make it only lighten. And if I say only lighten, then a lot of the marks will come through. So there's a difference there, right? And that's kind of nice. Or I can make a duplicate of it and then say on that one, only darken. Or even multiply, which will add them up together and then take the opacity down. I kind of like the intensity of those colors. But as long as you have a mix of soft and hard edges, you can see where the blur is almost a little too much. So I'm going to take that smudge and blur copy layer down a little bit, let that opacity overlap. Then you'll have full control of it. Right. Other things you can do with your glazing layer, just like with texture overlays. That's only at 42%, so let me do this one that's at 100%. You can play with its color. So I'll go right to hue saturation. And you can really, really push it with your glazes. You can really brighten them. You can really darken them. You can shift their whole setting. And digital is great because you can, use a lot of different, see a lot of different options before you have to settle on what you think works. Right, and then save it. So because I have a glazing layer here that's set on lighten, and I have a glazing layer here that's set on multiply at 42%, sometimes what I'll do is I'll right click. It's going to see if it could, or I'll merge them together. Let's see. Select them both, Command E. But often with layer styles, it won't give you the effect you want. So that's the only danger of using these different layer styles. I guess I shouldn't call them layer styles. What should I call them? Layer modes. But they're working here, and that's great. So as long as I've got my figure without a background, I can make use of those. Okay, now I'm going to get rid of my reference, and I'm going to paint in some antlers. So I've finished my glazing, and so I looked for some awkward antler reference. Make them a little bit bigger. This is what I found. Those ones will be the most believable. These ones are just crazy looking. So I think I'm going to kind of free paint these. So I'm going to bring this in as a new reference. I'll flip it.